Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in. It all came crashing down on a Thursday night. I was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer filling the silence. My husband, Eric, sat across from me, glued to his phone. It was a scene so ordinary it felt almost absurd in hindsight. The text notification shattered the quiet. Transaction declined insufficient funds. My stomach flipped. That account held the last of our savings, meticulously built over the years by cutting corners, skipping vacations, and choosing practicality over indulgence. "Eric," I said, my voice tight, "did you use the savings account today?" He didn't even look up. "No, why?" I pressed. "We're overdrawn. It's empty." Finally, his head snapped up, his face paled. "What? That's impossible." He reached for his phone, suddenly flustered, but his attempt at nonchalance was laughably transparent. I watched his expression morph from confusion to something darker. I froze. My mind raced through months, no-year subtles of strange inconsistencies, like the time Denise, my mother-in-law, casually mentioned a new recliner she'd bought but couldn't explain where the money had come from, or when Eric insisted on handling her taxes last year and wouldn't let me so much as glance at the paperwork. Little things I dismissed as quirks or, at worst, mild financial irresponsibility. But now, my instincts screamed that this was more than carelessness. "Pull up the account history," I said. My voice came out sharper than intended, but I didn't care. Eric fumbled with his phone, muttering something under his breath. "It's probably just a bank error," he mumbled. "I'll call them tomorrow." "Now, Eric." My tone was ice, and to my surprise, he flinched. He hesitated, but after a long moment, he tapped his screen. I leaned over, my pulse pounding in my ears, and there it was. Transaction after transaction, bleeding us dry. Thousands of dollars gone. My breath caught. Denise's name was all over it. Her wine club, her beauty subscriptions, even her rent payments, for an apartment she wasn't even living in anymore. She'd been staying with us for nearly 2 years, insisting her place was uninhabitable after a plumbing disaster, and yet, here she was, secretly keeping the lease. I couldn't speak. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. When I looked up at Eric, his face was a mess of panic and guilt, and I knew. I didn't even have to ask. "You knew?" My voice trembled, but the words cut like steel. "You've known this whole time." He stopped himself, scrambling for the right thing to say, but I didn't let him finish. "Don't you dare lie to me, Eric." "How long?" "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing at the stairs. Denise was upstairs in the guest room, probably enjoying the latest episode of some reality show on the TV I'd paid for. The thought made my blood boil. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. "Few months," he finally admitted, but his voice cracked. She needed help. She promised she'd pay it back." I stared at him in disbelief. "A few months, Eric, that account has been drained for years." His silence was answer enough. And that's when the anger took over. For years, I'd let her walk all over me. I'd been the one who cooked her meals, did her laundry, and paid her bills while she pretended to be helpless. And Eric had been right there, enabling her, covering for her. But as furious as I was, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Not without a fight. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. Eric had tried to explain half-hearted excuses about how family comes first, and how it wasn't supposed to go this far, but none of it mattered. My husband, my partner of 12 years, had let his mother bleed us dry behind my back. Worse, he had helped her do it. By sunrise, I had a plan. First, I needed proof. Not just screenshots of the bank statements. I needed something more concrete. Something that would leave no room for manipulation, no gaslighting. Denise had always been cunning, her talent for playing the victim unmatched. If I was going to confront her, I couldn't afford to leave her an escape route. When Eric left for work, I went into action. The guest room door was closed, Denise presumably still asleep. Her door was always closed. She treated the space like a palace she was entitled to. I cracked it open quietly and peered inside. She was sprawled on the bed, snoring lightly, her silk sleep mask askew. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep moving. I started with her purse, which was sitting on the dresser. Inside, I found her wallet, stuffed with credit cards and, bingo, a thick stack of receipts. Most were from high-end boutiques, expensive restaurants, and salons. The woman hadn't just been living off us, she'd been living lavishly. Then I hit the jackpot. An envelope with bank statements for an account I didn't recognize. It wasn't hers alone. It was a joint account. The second name, Eric's. My hands shook as I scanned the numbers. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled from our savings into this secret account over the past 2 years. The transactions weren't just small indulgences. They were calculated. Rent payments for her apartment, loan payments for her car, even a massive down payment for a luxury timeshare. A timeshare? While I was budgeting groceries, she was booking beachfront vacations. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and tucked it under my arm. I wanted to storm downstairs and shove them in Eric's face the second he came home, but I stopped myself. No, that would be too easy. And it wouldn't solve the problem. Denise had spent years wrapping Eric around her finger. If I wanted to dismantle their little scheme, I needed to be smarter. I left the guest room as quietly as I'd entered and headed for the living room, where Denise's laptop was sitting on the coffee table. She was annoyingly possessive about it, always snapping at me if I so much as glanced at the screen, which only made me more suspicious now. Sure enough, it was password protected, but after some trial and error, I cracked it. Her grandson's birthday, predictable. Her email inbox was a treasure trove of evidence. There were messages between her and Eric discussing transfers and cover stories. She'd even sent him a detailed budget last year, outlining how much more money she'd need to maintain appearances. The gall of this woman was unreal. I copied everything I could onto a flash drive and logged out. My hands were still trembling as I stashed the drive in my sock drawer upstairs, but for the first time in months, I felt calm. Not because the problem was solved, it was far from over, but because now I had the upper hand. That evening, I put on my best poker face and pretended everything was fine. Denise came downstairs for dinner, all smiles, asking if I'd remembered to pick up her favorite wine. I nearly laughed in her face but played along. Eric came home looking stressed, but I didn't press him. Let them think they were safe. The confrontation was coming, but it wouldn't happen on their terms. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like I'd been walking through fog, blindly giving and given to people who didn't deserve it, and now the fog had lifted. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted justice. I wanted my life back. Step 1 was confrontation, but not in the way they'd expect. Denise was a master manipulator, and Eric had been her puppet for so long he didn't even realize it. If I charged in guns blazing, they'd twist the narrative. Paint me as the irrational villain. No, I needed to be calculated, precise. I waited until lunchtime, when Eric was at work and Denise was lounging on the back patio with her tablet, sipping her third mimosa of the day. I joined her, pretending to be casual. Denise, I said, keeping my tone light. I think we should go over the household budget together. You know, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Her expression froze for a split second before she recovered, plastering on her usual sweet but condescending smile. Oh, darling, there's no need for that. You and Eric have been so generous. I couldn't possibly ask for more. Her voice dripped with fox humility, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. Good. She knew something was coming. Still, I pressed. I think it's important. Things have been tight lately, and I want to make sure we're being smart with our money. She waved her hand dismissively, but I didn't miss the way her grip tightened on the tablet. Of course. But you know, these things are really Eric's department. He's always been so good with numbers. I almost laughed out loud. Eric, good with numbers. The man couldn't balance a checkbook if his life depended on it. No, this was her attempt to deflect, to steer the conversation away from anything incriminating. But I wasn't backing down. That's funny, I said, keeping my voice innocent, because I noticed a lot of transactions on the savings account that I don't remember approving. Wine clubs, rent payments, even a down payment for a timeshare. Sound familiar? Her face went pale. The mask of composure slipped for just a moment, and I saw the panic underneath. But then she rallied, her voice sharp now. Are you accusing me of something? I'm not accusing, I said calmly. I'm stating facts. But if you'd like to explain how you're ended up on dozens of charges to my savings account, I'm all ears. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She glanced toward the house, probably hoping Eric would walk in and rescue her, but it was just the two of us. No buffer. No backup. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally stammered. Eric must have. He told me he was handling everything. Ah, there it was. Throwing Eric under the bus. It just as I'd expected. It was her go-to strategy whenever she got caught. Play dumb, shift blame, and hope someone else takes the fall. I leaned in, dropping the pretense of politeness. Denise, let me make something very clear. I know about the secret account. I know about the money Eric's been funneling to you for years. I have bank statements, emails, and receipts to prove it. So don't insult my intelligence by pretending you're some innocent bystander." Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but there was none. For the first time since I'd met her, Denise looked genuinely afraid. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you out of my house," I said, my voice steely. "And I want every penny you've taken from us back. You can figure it out with Eric. I don't care how you do it, but you have 30 days. She blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious. Where will I go? What will I do?" "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You've been living off me for years while I work myself to the bone to keep this family afloat. You've taken enough. It ends now." For a moment, I thought she might cry, but then her expression hardened. "Eric will never let you do this," she snapped. "You think you have the power here, but you don't. Eric knows where his loyalties lie, and it's not with you." The word stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled. "We'll see about that." I left her there, fuming, and went back inside. My hands were shaking, but I felt a spark of triumph. Denise thought she could use Eric as a shield, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. That evening, Eric came home to an atmosphere so thick with tension it could have been cut with a knife. Denise was sulking in the guest room, which she slammed shut as soon as she heard the front door open. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, the rhythmic clatter echoing through the house. Eric walked in cautiously, sensing something was off. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down on the counter. "Everything okay?" I didn't look up. "We need to talk." The color drained from his face. He tried to play it cool, but his fingers fumbled with the buttons on his shirt. About what?" "About the account." I finally looked at him, meeting his eyes dead on. "The one you've been funneling money into for Denise. The one you've been hiding from me." His jaw dropped. For a second, he just stood there, blinking, as if his brain couldn't process the words. Then he started laughing, nervously, falsely, like a bad actor in a low-budget play. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I snapped, slamming the knife down on the cutting board. The sound made him flinch. "Don't insult me, Eric. I've seen the statements. I've seen the emails. I've seen everything." He froze, his face a mix of panic and guilt. "It's not what you think," he blurted out. "Then explain it to me," I said, crossing my arms. "Explain how my money, our savings, ended up paying for her rent, her spa days, and her luxury timeshare. Explain how you've been lying to me for years." "I wasn't lying," he said quickly. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overact." "Overact?" I repeated, incredulous. "Eric, you drained our savings. You stole from me to fund her lifestyle, and you think I'm the one overreacting. It's not like that," he protested, running a hand through his hair. "She needed help. She's my mom. What was I supposed to do? Let her go homeless? She's been living in our house rent, free for 2 years, I shot back. "She's not homeless, Eric. She's a leech, and you've been enabling her." But his face twisted into a scowl. "Don't talk about her like that. She's been through a lot." "And I haven't," I interrupted. "I've been the one holding this family together, while you two spent behind my back. I've been the one working overtime to make sure the bills are paid, while she's sipping mimosas and shopping for designer handbags." "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "She's my mother. And I'm your wife," I yelled, slamming my hand on the counter. "Or does that mean nothing to you anymore?" He didn't answer. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I refused to let them. Not now. Not in front of him. "Do you even care about what this has done to us?" I asked quietly. "Do you care about me at all, he said, his voice softening. "Of course I do. But she's family. I couldn't just abandon her." "She abandoned herself," I said coldly. "And now, thanks to you, she's destroyed our marriage too." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, Eric looked like he wanted to argue, but then his shoulders slumped. He knew I was right. "I'll fix it," he said finally. "I'll talk to her and we'll figure something out. Just don't do anything drastic, okay?" I didn't respond. I just turned back to the cutting board and resumed chopping. The rhythmic sound filled the silence as Eric left the kitchen, his footsteps heavy with defeat. But I wasn't waiting for him to figure something out. I had my own plan, and it didn't involve trusting him, or Denise, ever again. The following days were a tense waiting game. Eric kept his distance, clearly uneasy around me. Denise, on the other hand, was bolder than ever. She strutted around the house like she owned it, her tone sharper, her demands more blatant. It was as if she knew Eric's loyalty was hers, and she had nothing to fear. But that only made my resolve stronger. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her win. I'd already started gathering everything I needed for my next move. The flash drive with her emails and bank records was safely stashed away. I had duplicates hidden in multiple locations, just in case. This wasn't just a fight for my savings anymore, it was a fight for my dignity. The turning point came when Denise finally overplayed her hand. It was late afternoon, and I was in the living room pretending to read when I overheard her on the phone. She was on the back patio, speaking loudly enough that I couldn't miss it even if I tried. I don't care what she thinks, Denise snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. She's just being dramatic. Eric will side with me. He always does. I froze, the book forgotten in my lap. No, I haven't told her yet, she continued. But it's almost done. The lawyer said the paperwork should be ready by next week. Once Eric signs, it's over. But paperwork. Lawyer. My heart pounded as I leaned closer to the window, straining to catch every word. Yes, the house is worth a fortune, Denise said with a laugh. And once it's in his name, she can't do anything about it. She'll have no choice but to leave. My blood ran cold. They were planning to take the house. My house, the one I'd paid for, managed, and fought to keep afloat while they bled me dry. And now they were plotting to force me out of it. I stood up, my hands trembling with fury. But instead of storming out to confront her, I forced myself to stay calm. Denise wanted me emotional, impulsive. That's how she won. Not this time. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording. Her voice carried through the open patio door. Oh, Eric will handle her, she was saying. He always caves. Besides, once I'm on the deed, she can't touch me. Let her try. What's she going to do? See me? She doesn't have the guts. I stopped the recording and saved it. My heart was pounding, but my mind was sharp. I finally had the smoking gun I needed. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was fraud, manipulation, and emotional abuse, and I was done playing defense. When Eric came home that night, I was ready. I waited until Denise was upstairs, probably soaking in the bath I'd paid for, before confronting him. Eric, I said, stepping in front of him as he set down his briefcase. We need to talk. His face fell. Not this again. Wes, this again, I interrupted. But this time, I'm not asking questions. I'm giving you a choice. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording. His face went white as Denise's voice filled the room, every damning word crystal clear. By the time it ended, his mouth was hanging open. You're planning to sign the house over to her? I asked, my voice trembling with controlled fury. After everything I've done for you. For her. It's not what it sounds like, he stammered, but I held up a hand. Save it. I don't care what excuses you or Denise come up with. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell her the plan is off. You're going to cut her off financially. Completely. And you're going to start working to fix the mess you've made of this marriage. Or what? He asked weakly. I leaned in, my voice low and deadly. Or I take this recording, the bank statements, and every shred of evidence I've gathered straight to a lawyer, and then I take everything. The color drained from his face. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing his cushy life, the house, the stability I had provided for years while he let his mother run wild. He faltered. I'll talk to her. You'll do more than that, I said firmly. You'll end this. All of it. Because if you don't, Eric, you'll find out exactly how much guts I have. I left him standing there, speechless, as I walked upstairs. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. The silence in the house the next morning was suffocating. Eric left for work without saying a word, and Denise stayed locked in her room. I didn't mind. It gave me time to solidify my next move. Cutting Denise off was only part of the equation. To ensure she couldn't worm her way back into our lives, I needed to go deeper, expose just how far her schemes had gone. By noon, I was at the local courthouse. My plan wasn't revenge for its own sake. I needed legal protection. I filed for a financial restraining order to prevent Eric or Denise from making any major transactions involving our joint assets. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. Then I made another stop. Using the documentation I'd gathered, bank statements, the recorded phone call, and even copies of the emails, I filed a formal complaint with the fraud division at my bank. What Denise and Eric had done wasn't just immoral, it was likely illegal. And I wanted a paper trail in case this escalated further. That evening, the tension in the house exploded. Denise stormed into the kitchen while I was making dinner, her face red with rage. She slammed a piece of paper onto the counter, my restraining order filing. Eric must have told her. What the hell is this? She spat. You think you can just push me out like I'm some kind of criminal? I didn't even flinch. If the shoe fits, Denise. Her jaw dropped. She wasn't used to being confronted like this. For years I'd played the peacemaker, avoiding conflict for Eric's sake. But not anymore. You ungrateful little. She started, but I cut her off. Ungrateful, I said, my voice rising. I've supported you for years, Denise. I've put food on your table, paid your bills, and even let you live in my home for free. And this is how you repay me. By stealing from me and plotting to take my house. She looked taken aback, but her expression quickly twisted into one of defiance. You don't understand what it's like, being a single mother with no one to rely on. I did what I had to do. No, I said sharply. You did what you wanted to do, because you knew Eric would cover for you. And now that he's finally waking up to what you've done, you're panicking. You don't know what you're talking about. She snapped. Eric loves me. He'll never turn on me, I smiled coldly. We'll see about that. At that moment, Eric walked in. His face was pale, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He glanced between us, clearly dreading whatever confrontation was unfolding. Eric, Denise said, her tone suddenly saccharine. Your wife is trying to destroy our family. She filed some ridiculous order to cut me off. You can't let her do this. Eric opened his mouth to respond, but I spoke first. No, Eric, I said, fixing him with a steely glare. It's time you chose. Your mother has been using you for years. She's manipulated you into stealing from me, lying to me, and risking everything we've built together. Are you going to keep enabling her, or are you finally going to stand up for your wife? His eyes darted between us, panic etched across his face. I didn't want it to go this far, he said finally. I thought I was helping. I didn't realize it. Don't listen to her. Denise interrupted, her voice shrill. She's trying to turn you against me. After everything I've done for you. Enough, Eric snapped, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. Both Denise and I froze. He turned to her, his face hard. Mom, I can't keep doing this. I love you, but she's right. This has to stop. What are you saying? Denise whispered, her voice trembling. I'm saying you need to leave, he said firmly. We'll help you get back on your feet, but you can't stay here anymore. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Denise's eyes. She turned to me, her expression desperate. You did this, she hissed. You poisoned him against me. No, I said, my voice calm but resolute. You did this to yourself. Denise's mask of confidence shattered, and she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Eric sank into a chair, his head in his hands. It's not over, he said quietly. She won't go down without a fight. Neither will I replied, my voice steady, because for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. The next morning, Denise was gone. Her bedroom was stripped bare, her clothes and personal items packed up without so much as a goodbye. It should have felt like a victory, but I knew better. Denise didn't just leave. She retreated, regrouping for whatever underhanded move she planned next. Eric, looking haggard, avoided me all morning. I didn't push him. I needed him to stew in the consequence of his choices. While he sulked, I dug deeper into Denise's finances. If she thought she could sneak off and regroup unnoticed, she was sorely mistaken. By mid-afternoon, I uncovered my next lead. In one of the emails I'd copied from her laptop, Denise had mentioned a private account, separate from the one she and Eric had been using. Curious, I cross-referenced it with the transactions from the secret account. Sure enough, several large sums had been transferred to an offshore account over the past 6 months. Offshore? That was unexpected. Why would Denise, a supposedly helpless, unemployed woman, need to stash money overseas? My instincts told me there was more to this story than petty manipulation and greed. Denise was hiding something big. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Julia who had a reputation for dismantling schemes like this with surgical precision. Julia had already reviewed the evidence I'd given her and was itching to get started. You're telling me she has offshore accounts? Julia said, her voice sharp with interest. That changes everything. This isn't just financial mismanagement anymore. It could be fraud or even tax evasion. What do we do? I asked. Let me dig into this account, Julia said. If we can prove she's been siphoning money into an offshore fund, we might have grounds to take her to court. And if your husband's name is on any of those transfers. She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Eric could be implicated. It was a sobering thought, but I couldn't let it deter me. Denise's schemes had cost me too much already, And if Eric had chosen to align himself with her, he'd have to face the consequences. By evening, the house was eerily quiet. Eric sat at the kitchen table, nursing a beer and staring into space. I could tell he wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. Finally, I broke the silence. "Did you know about the offshore account?" I asked bluntly. He looked up startled. "What? No. What are you talking about?" I studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. He looked genuinely confused, but I wasn't ready to trust him yet. Denise has been funneling money into an offshore account for months. Thousands of dollars. I want to know if you helped her. His eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "I didn't. I swear. I had no idea." "Then why didn't you stop her when you had the chance?" I shot back. "Why did you let her manipulate you into stealing from me?" Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I thought I was helping her. She made it sound like she didn't have anyone else. And honestly, I didn't think it was that bad." "That's the problem, Eric," I said, my voice cold. "You didn't think. You let her walk all over me over us, because you were too afraid to say no to her. And now look where we are." He didn't respond, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, he said, "What are you going to do?" "I've already started," I replied. "My lawyer is looking into the offshore account. If Denise has broken any laws, we'll take her to court." Eric's face turned pale. "Court? Do you have to go that far?" I slammed my hand on the table, my patience snapping. "Yes, Eric. I do, because if I don't, she'll keep coming after us. She won't stop until she's bled us dry and left us with nothing. Is that what you want?" He looked away, shame flickering across his face. "No, I don't." "Then grow a spine and stand with me for once," I said, my voice cutting. "Because this time, Eric, I'm not backing down." He nodded reluctantly, but I could tell he was still struggling to let go of his loyalty to Denise. I didn't care. I had a plan, and nothing, not Denise, not Eric, not anyone, was going to stop me from taking back control of my life. The next morning, Julia called with an update. "We've got something," she said. "The offshore account isn't just in Denise's name. It's a shell corporation. And guess who the listed beneficiary is?" "Eric." I guessed, dread pooling in my stomach. Julia said, "It's a joint account. Denise and someone named Anthony Wilson. Ring any bells?" I froze. Anthony Wilson. The name meant nothing to me, but the implications were chilling. Denise wasn't working alone. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice shaking. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Julia said. "But I'll tell you this, if she's tied to someone else, this rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than we thought." For the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. Denise had always been manipulative, but this was something else entirely. Whatever she was involved in, it was bigger than just my savings, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. Julia's revelation about the Shell Corporation and Anthony Wilson lit a fire under me. Denise wasn't just a manipulative freeloader, she was operating on a level I hadn't anticipated. Someone like her didn't stumble into offshore accounts and corporate structures by accident. This was deliberate, and now, she dragged me into it. The next step was figuring out who Anthony Wilson was. Julia promised to dig deeper, but I wasn't about to sit on my hands. That evening, I searched through Denise's emails again. Most of them were the same mundane nonsense: shopping confirmations, spam, the occasional flirtatious exchange with someone named Tony. Tony. I froze. Could that be Anthony Wilson? My heart raced as I opened the thread. The emails weren't explicit, but they were unmistakably personal. She referred to him as darling, and talked about or future plans. He responded in kind, mentioning or little nest egg, and a place by the beach. A sickening realization settled over me. Denise wasn't just scheming to support herself, she was scheming to build a life with someone else, on my dime. I took screenshots and forwarded them to Julia. "Does this sound like our guy?" I asked. Her reply came within minutes. "Could be. Let me cross-reference the name. I'll get back to you tomorrow." The next day brought an explosive development. Julia called early in the morning. "We've got him. Anthony Wilson is Denise's boyfriend, and he has a record, a big one. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. He's a professional con artist." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "She's working with a criminal." "More than working," Julia said. "They've been running scams together for years. That offshore account, it's their primary laundering hub. And the kicker, your husband's money trail links directly to it. If this goes public, Eric could face serious legal consequences." The implications were staggering. Eric, oblivious as always, had been funneling money to fund a criminal operation. Denise hadn't just manipulated him. She'd weaponized his naivety, and now, his blind loyalty to her had put both of us in jeopardy. That evening, I laid everything out for Eric. I didn't hold back. No softening the truth, no sugarcoating. I showed him the emails, the offshore account details, and Julia's findings on Anthony Wilson. As I spoke, his face turned from confusion to horror. She's been using me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Finally figured that out, did you? I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. She's been using both of us, Eric. And now, thanks to you, we're tied to a criminal operation. He buried his face in his hands. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. That doesn't matter anymore, I said sharply. What matters is what we do next. I've already started the process of separating our finances. I suggest you get on board, or you'll end up going down with her. He looked up, panic in his eyes. What do you mean, separating finances? I mean I'm not letting you drag me into this mess, I said. If Denise and Anthony want to go down in flames, fine. But I'm not going with them. Eric sat there stunned as I walked away. For once, he didn't argue. I received an unexpected call. It wasn't Julia. It was Denise. Her voice was calm, eerily so. We need to talk, she said. About what? I asked, my voice cold. I think you know, she said. You've been busy, haven't you? Digging into things that don't concern you. I stiffened. Everything you've done concerns me, Denise. You've been stealing from me, manipulating Eric, and now I know about Anthony. There was a pause, then a dry laugh. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, but you've made a mistake. Enlighten me? I said, my grip tightening on the phone. You think you've won, she said, but you're not ready for what's coming. I've been doing this a long time, sweetheart. People like you don't scare me. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. We'll see who's scared when the authorities get involved. Good luck with that, she said, her tone dripping with confidence. Just remember, you're not the only one with cards to play. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me gripping the phone, a mix of anger and unease coursing through me. Denise wasn't going down without a fight. But neither was I. Denise's warning lingered in my mind long after the call ended. She wasn't bluffing, I could feel it. The question wasn't whether she had another play. It was what she was planning, and how far she'd go to protect herself and Anthony. That evening, Eric returned home looking more defeated than ever. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, fiddling with the edge of his beer bottle. She called me, he said finally. Let me guess, I replied. She told you I'm the villain, tearing the family apart, ruining her life. He nodded. She said she's being unfairly attacked, that you're trying to destroy her reputation. He hesitated. She also said she has evidence against you. I raised an eyebrow. Evidence of what? She didn't say, he admitted. Just that she has something big, and if you don't back off, she'll use it, bah. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Denise was bluffing, but she was dangerous enough to make it convincing. If she had any leverage, real or fabricated, it could derail everything I'd worked for. Do you believe? I asked, my voice steady. Eric shook his head, his shoulders slumping. I don't know what to believe anymore. I just want this to stop. I studied him for a long moment. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. But regret wasn't enough. He had to act. Eric, I said quietly, if you really want to fix this, you need to help me. Denise isn't just a problem for me. She's a problem for you too. She's been lying to you, manipulating you, and now she's dragging you into something criminal. What can I do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I slid the folder across the table. The one with all the evidence I'd gathered, emails, bank statements, and the recording of Denise's conversation about taking the house. Start by being honest with yourself about who she really is, and then help me take her down. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder. Finally, he opened it, his eyes scanning the documents. As he read, his expression shifted from disbelief to anger. I didn't know, he said again, his voice trembling. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said. But that doesn't change the fact that you're in this mess because you trusted her. Now it's time to trust me. For the first time, Eric nodded. The next day, Julia called with another update. I found the connection between Denise and Anthony Wilson, she said, her tone triumphant. It's deeper than we thought. They've been running scams together for over a decade, and get this, they've both been flagged in multiple states for similar schemes. My stomach turned. What kind of schemes? Fraud, identity theft, even extortion, Julia said. But they've always managed to slip through the cracks. Denise plays the victim while Anthony handles the dirty work. It's a well-oiled machine. What do we do? I asked. I've already contacted the authorities, Julia replied. With the evidence you've provided, we have a strong case against them. But it's going to take time. In the meantime, I suggest keeping your distance and watching your back. Denise knows she's cornered, and people like her are dangerous when they're desperate. That evening, I set up a meeting with Eric. I wasn't sure if he'd follow through, but to my surprise, he did. We sat at a coffee shop, away from the house, away from Denise's influence. I talked to Julia, I said, watching his reaction carefully. She's building a case against Denise and Anthony, but it's going to take time. I need to know if you're with me on this. Eric hesitated, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. I am, he said finally. I've let her control me for too long. I want to make this right. Good, I said, because the next step is going to be hard. We need to confront her. Together, he looked up, his eyes filled with fear. What if she fights back? She will, I said. But this time, we'll be ready. That night, we returned home to find Denise sitting in the living room, her face calm but her eyes blazing. She'd been waiting for us. So, she said, her tone icy. You've been busy, haven't you? Eric froze, but I stepped forward, meeting her gaze head on. You're done, Denise. We know everything. About the offshore account, about Anthony, about the scams. The authorities are involved now. It's over, but her expression didn't falter. If anything, she looked amused. You think you've won, she said, leaning back in her chair. You have no idea what you've started. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to let her see it. This isn't a game, Denise. You've destroyed enough lives. It's time to face the consequences. Her smile faded, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. We'll see, she said quietly, and with that, she stood and walked out of the room, leaving us in tense silence. The final showdown was coming. I could feel it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Denise's car pulling out of the driveway. By the time I got downstairs, she was gone. The guest room was empty, save for a note she'd left on the nightstand. It read, "Regret this. Both of you." I stared at the note, mix of relief and unease washing over me. Denise didn't leave because she was defeated. She left because she was regrouping. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had the truth on my side, and for the first time, Eric did too. That afternoon, Julia called with an update. The authorities moved fast, she said. Denise and Anthony have been flagged for investigation in multiple states. They're watching her closely now. If she tries to access that offshore account or make another move, they'll shut her down. I thanked her, but I knew this was only part of the battle. The bigger challenge was rebuilding what Denise had nearly destroyed: my trust, my finances, and my peace of mind. 2 weeks later, Eric and I sat down for what would be our hardest conversation yet. We'd been avoiding it, skirting around the damage Denise had done, but it was time to face the truth. I need to know if you're really in this with me, I said, my voice steady but firm. Because I can't do this again, Eric. I can't spend my life fighting your battles while you stand on the sidelines. He looked down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I know I've let you down, he said quietly. I let her control me for so long, I didn't realize how much damage she was doing. To us, I nodded, waiting. I'm sorry, he said, looking up at me. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to earn it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Good, I said. Because if we're going to move forward, things have to change. No more secrets, no more enabling, and if Denise comes back, you don't open that door. Not ever. He nodded, his expression resolute. I promise. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a start. A month later, I stood in the backyard, sipping coffee as the morning sun warmed my face. The house was quieter now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. Denise's presence had been a dark cloud over my life for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without her shadow looming over me. Eric was still rebuilding my trust. It would take time, and maybe we'd never fully recover, but I'd learned something valuable through all of this, something I wished I'd understood years ago. People will only take as much as you allow them to. For years, I'd let Denise dictate the terms of my life. I'd sacrificed my own happiness, my own boundaries, to keep the peace. But peace built on silence and sacrifice isn't peace at all. It's submission, and submission only leads to resentment. Now, I was reclaiming my life. Piece by piece, I was setting boundaries, standing up for myself, and refusing to let anyone make me feel small again. For women like me, women who've spent decades putting others first, swallowing our frustrations for the sake of family. It's easy to lose yourself, but I've learned that self-respect isn't selfish. It's necessary. And while the scars Denise left will always be there, they're a reminder of the woman I've become, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to settle for anything less than the life I deserve. As I stood there, the weight of the past finally lifting, I smiled. Because I knew, for the first time in years, that I was finally free.